Good evening. Hi, I'm Bonnie Clearwater, Director and Chief Curator of the Museum of Contemporary Art, and I am delighted to be able to present another one of our Contemporary Art Boot Camp lectures, this one on art and emotion. First, I would like to thank Tom and Stephanie Bloom for sponsoring our MOCA by Moonlight series. Every Wednesday night at MOCA, you could come for a different enrichment program as part of our MOCA by Moonlight series, which means MOCA is open at night on Wednesdays till 9 o'clock. And I encourage you to either look at our website to see what's coming up, make sure that you are on our email list so that you can get the updates every week of what's coming up in MOCA on the news, because there's just so much happening here. And we hope you're able to take part of everything. Last Friday night, we had our free monthly jazz at MOCA with Nicole Henry as our guest performer. And we had close to 1,000 people here that night enjoying the concert. That's a free concert, and that happens the last Friday of every month. So I hope you come for that as well. And just to let you know the different kinds of educational programs we're doing as part of the MOCA Art Institute. The MOCA Art Institute was launched this year as a way to, it's our umbrella organization for all the educational programs we do for children, teens, and adults. And one of the things that we have really made as the focus of our education is teens. All of our programs for teens are free. And in light of, and we've been doing these programs since the late 1990s, and we've discovered that, teens are the hardest group to reach, but if you can reach them, they benefit the most out of any group for what we have to offer. And consequently, we are particularly been working with teens that are at risk, both in our programs here, but also in our Women on the Rise program, where our educators and artists go out to 12 different partnering organizations all through the county, including the Juvenile Detention Center, where we work with teenage girls on using contemporary art, particularly contemporary women artists, as model of how to deal with the issues that they have to deal with on a daily basis. Out of that has come two important summits that are happening. One, April 21st, where the lead actor from the movie Gran Torino will be here, along with the leading professor from gender studies at Rutgers University, who will be leading an event with teens about the way the media represents particularly immigrant teens in films and other media, and how to deal with these issues, how to respond, how to create a more positive outlook. That is being followed on May 28th, May 4th, with our Girls Summit. Now, the Girls Summit is specifically geared to educators, counselors, and other individuals who are working with teenage girls at risk, working with our educators and facilitators to learn how to use these really effective ways of contemporary art as a model for reaching the teens. Obviously, based on recent events with teens and violence, it seems that these kinds of programs are more important than ever. This was not done in response to these recent events, but the fact that MOCA has been long involved, long aware of how important these issues are, and that we, as an institution, are able to work with community and improve the lives of teens, and by improving their lives, we're improving their families' lives, which in turn is improving our entire community. So just to be aware of how comprehensive MOCA's programs are. And it also shows how through art, through contemporary art, these students have been able to deal with emotions in a way that they couldn't if they just were talking about it. How things come out, how they're able to deal with things in a positive, creative way as opposed to a destructive way. And that sort of leads, we have seen on a direct, first-hand basis how contemporary art can express and connect emotionally with the viewer, and how that can transform lives. Now, today's topic is contemporary art and emotion, and this actually came together very quickly. One of the things that I'm always doing, people always wonder, how do I come up with what I do? What I do is artist-driven. I see what is interesting to artists at the moment. What are they talking about? What are the issues that they are trying to deal with in a variety of ways? And that gets me thinking and putting things into perspective. Why is this important at this point? What does it mean in our time that artists are grappling with these issues? And that's another important part of why we look at contemporary art. Contemporary artists are so in tune with what matters to us in our lives. Even before we know it, they have already zeroed in on it. And they're able to give concrete form to these emotions, these issues, these concerns that we all have. We recently hosted a series, a day-long of conversations called Artist to Artist, and it was where we brought together close to, I think it was 16 artists that have played an important part in MOCA's 15-year history. And this was done on the occasion of our 15th anniversary that we present the conversations on February 26th. I moderated these 6 hours, and the artists got, each group was only up there for an hour, but I was there the whole day. But that was an interesting thing because I started to see that even without having an overriding theme for the day's conversation, that each group kept coming back to the idea of emotion in art. And I was particularly struck by the conversation that Tracy Emin, Jack Pearson, and Ragnar Kjartason had, and I thought it would be interesting to play an excerpt of this, and you can see what you missed by not being there. And Tracy, come to a conclusion.
About the title for this show?
No, but about does love exist?
I think love does exist, and it truly exists within the ether. This is how far I've got at the moment. But whether or not you can attach yourself onto it, and I'm talking about the truth within love. I'm not talking about, do you love your wife? Yes, I do. She's my wife or husband or lover or whatever. I'm talking about the true entity of love, whether or not we can hold it, whether or not we can see it, whether or not it's truly there. Or is it just a notion that we sort of agree with or go along with? Like you could say like God. It's much easier to accept that God is there rather than have a really big argument with someone about the fact that God isn't. And people also have the same attitude towards love. And I'm actually searching to try and find out for myself whether love is there, whether or not we can hold it and how we can transfer it or how we use it or whether it actually protects us, whether it's a true substance. It's like ghost or otherworldly things. Do ghosts exist? Mm-hmm. Some people are going to tell you, yes, they definitely do, and other people are going to say, don't be silly. I'm talking about the things which exist within the ether that we can no longer see anymore, but should be weighted. Love is a weighted thing which we know about, but is it really there? So I don't know.
Well, I think
no idea.
Jack, I think, also deals a lot with the idea of love and the kind of sort of faded glamour of love and lost love or even sin.
Or, romance, I think is the over...
Can you talk into the...
Yeah, I guess. I feel like the narrative we should be most concerned with is whether or not this tent is going to fall in.
I should point out that we are going to be expanding, and one of the reasons is we do not have an auditorium.
I'm just going to go off narrative. I don't know. I think I got narrative in my work because maybe I remained a youthful narcissist until I was, I mean, maybe even now, but I like to think of it as like sort of started to evaporate at 30, and everything I did was as if somehow, like that was the only way I could make work, was like, well, this will be as if I am an artist doing something that seems overly emotional or making something that seems like it's about this. And it wasn't until, like, you know, a while in that I could let go of that on a certain level, and then there was a narrative that I had imposed somehow, and that got told back to me, and I could tell it was being received by people as this, you know, I am a kid from the country. I don't feel like I have any real, like, the idea of like going to the city and being an artist had to be put in this framework of something done in a novel or a movie or in history. It wasn't something I could really do. You know what I mean? It wasn't my natural trajectory. So I had to sort of almost adopt it as a role. And then around the time I first started showing, like, the work I wanted to make, like, I would always impose these rules, and one of it was like that it was supposed to be real stuff that was like, didn't include metaphor. It was just like real. This bottle was real. This was like a thing of my life that was real. So therefore I did all these installations, and, you know, knowing that they would be fake by putting them in the theatrical context of,
well, actually, we did the tableau. I just remembered you were in the tableau show, and that was one of the things you were doing as well. When you made the backstage of a club scene.
Right.
Remember that one? You remember that one?
Yeah, that was a big piece.
And it was about it not being a fiction but a reality.
On a certain level, yeah. I mean, I tried to make it as real as possible, these installations. So
I'm kind of interested in how the 21st century is, in a way. It's of course an echo of the most shocking century in human history.
The 20th one?
Yeah.
Oh.
And I mean, the romantic is, in a way, the romantic is just like the personal, like, and also seeing the world, you know, in kind of like a melancholic way. It's like Victor Hugo said that melancholia is the enjoyment of being sad. You know.
And that's Ragnar Kjartason, who's going to be having a show here in May. So we're dealing with art and emotion. Now, these conversations led me to think about emotions in contemporary art. And you could see what was really interesting was Tracy Emin and Isaac Julian, who was also part of that panel, both of whom are British, and Ragnar, who's Icelandic. For them, emotions were real. And they were quite honest in their use of the emotional in their work and belief that you could actually convey this to the viewer. And what was really very funny and enlightening regarding Jack Pearson, Jack's family were, you know, basically came in, if maybe not on the Mayflower, they was certainly right after Plymouth Rock. You know, he is from a family that, you know, descendants of the Puritans, and he absolutely insisted that his work was not about his emotion, and in fact, he was being ironic and cynical, and no one was believing him, and he literally got off the stage and almost like Rumpelstiltskin said, "I'm really cynical, really, really cynical." And, you know, so it really struck me that here we had the Europeans who were so, you know, my heart is right there, and my heart is in my work, and you know, and we want to convey this to the audience, and Jack, as, you know, the American, being ironic and cynical and sarcastic about emotion, which I still don't believe, but that was the position he took. I was also struck by the response that so many artists have to Rita Ackerman's work, the artist we have up now. Tracy Emin said to me, without knowing I was doing Rita's show, she said, "Oh, Rita, she's one of the few artists that can really pull from her gut and convincingly get it out there in her art." And I heard this consistently from artists, and Rita is a Hungarian artist who grew up in Hungary and really is in touch with her emotions. She said something funny, what I thought was rather funny when we, in our early meetings, that in Hungary, when she was a kid, and she grew up under communism and went to school art school in '89, just as the regimes were changing. But she said in Hungary, everyone was really obsessed with psychoanalysis. The only problem was there were no professional psychoanalysts in Hungary. So everybody would practice self-analysis. And I just, imagine this whole country, walking around like this, throwing themselves on psychiatrist couches. But then I was thinking, how perfect for an artist. What better background than to be able to do work and then to stand back and have that distancing, to be able to analyze, well, why did I do that? And what am I trying to do, and is it working? So, so what I'm going to do both in this lecture is both give you a background of why, how the emotional in art has changed through the ages. We're going to go back to the Middle Ages, actually. And where that cynicism in America came from and whether things are changing. I actually wrote an article for an art magazine in LA in 1990 dealing with this exact subject. And what was interesting at that time was it was at the very moment that there was a shift in America, particularly, from this idea of artists being too cool, the cynical, we even called the 80s were the period of irony. The being too cool to be able to deal directly with emotions. And then in the late 80s, we start seeing a shift. And I wrote about why all of a sudden there was this shift, and I'll be touching on some of those topics. Emotional content was essential in medieval art, and those of you who know me know I was originally a medievalist, so I know what I'm talking about. It had a didactic purpose. It aimed for the viewer to believe in and experience the suffering and sacrifice of Christ and the martyrs. And there was a specific goal and purpose for the art in conveying these emotions. It was also a way of warning sinners that they better get their act together for their sins or crimes. And one of my favorite examples of this is in Bruges, and I got to see it this this summer in person, and it depicts the story of a Persian judge who's punished for his corruption by being flayed alive, which you see on the right. And what's interesting is my flight home from Brussels, the movie In Bruges was playing, and if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it, especially go visit Bruges before you see the movie Bruges. Makes a lot more sense. And there's a scene where the protagonist, who's a hitman, or failed hitman, is shown physically cringing and reacting to this horrific scene, which really serves as the basis of the film's morality tale. And even the most gruesome and violent scenes in the film suggest the same kind of visceral pain and suffering that you can experience in this painting. Okay, and I think when I was trying to think of examples of works that really conveyed love, the first thing that came to my mind was Michelangelo's Pietà, and you just have this sense of pure love, sadness, loss. It makes the viewer share this experience of love for the sacrifice of Christ. Now, this was in the Vatican, so we know that it clearly was meant for a religious purpose. But what happens to the emotional in art when art becomes secular, when the age becomes secular? What is the purpose of emotional content in art in a secular age? And one of the things that we see happening after starting with the Renaissance all the way to our modern times, is that it increasingly becomes about the individual. And to bring it up closer to our times, in the industrial age, the industrial age led to feelings of alienation, which is represented by artists such as Manet, one of the famous paintings on the left, the bar at the Folies Bergère, which communicates feelings of isolation to the viewer, melancholy, bleakness. This barmaid standing behind the counter, she is literally separated by that bar between with the viewer and herself. That definitely implies that we are standing in front of her. And you feel this separation, this isolation. In fact, she is completely isolated from the entire crowd that is reflected back in that mirror behind her in the bar. And I thought it was, Rita Ackerman does go back into art history and is very knowledgeable about these sources. And I do know that this painting served as the basis of this work that is a collaboration she did with the filmmaker Harmony Korine, in which she used a film still of this, rather grotesque-looking sort of female figure, again, and then collaged with with a canvas that's been sort of abstractly painted that is almost the equivalent of that bar separating the figure and the viewer. And the way that the photograph and the painted area comes together, that area beneath the left arm looks almost like a claw. You have sort of this monstrous, but it does capture that kind of sense of isolation and introspection that Manet has. Now, with the post-impressionists the symbolists in art and literature look to depict private pictorial world that emphasize this kind of introspection. And another really good example of this is Pierre Bonnard representing figures. They're in the same room, but they look like they have no relationship to each other. They're isolated, they're introspective. They look like they're blending right into the background. Remember also in the 20th century, the increasing interest in psychology by artists, which is also reflected in the post-impressionist, surrealist, and abstract expressionists. And here again with Rita Ackerman, she was specifically looking at Bonnard, and there does seem to be a very close relationship compositionally between Rita's work and the Bonnard here. The two figures, well, actually there's many figures in here. You just have to go and look real carefully. I'll send you, but you can see there's two seated figures that are obvious, and then the torso of another figure that's sort of cropped there. But clearly they are emerging and then going back into the background as well, but at the same time completely isolated from each other. Ackerman was specifically inspired by early 20th century Hungarian symbolist painter in two of the landscapes in the show. And it shows how symbolist artists used particularly landscape as a way to convey emotion. In both paintings, in Rita and the symbolist painter, and you can see I'm trying to avoid pronouncing his name. There's a strong curvilinear design, dark, ominous shadows, and I don't know if you could even see them here, but tiny figurative elements that are swallowed up by the landscape that give these paintings their emotional impact. And in another painting by Ackerman called In the Shade, you could see how those dark shadows that were both in her painting and the Symbolist painters have overtaken the other figures completely. As the sense of shadow and dread that overtakes what would have been a beautiful bucolic picnic scene, and it even starts out with a lovely rainbow over the whole scene, which clearly has been overcome as well by the shadow. Okay, in the mid-20th century, the abstract expressionists pondering this problem determined that the representation of the human figure could no longer communicate universal conditions, as it was too specific and anecdotal. Artists such as Mark Rothko eliminated the figure from the work and turned to making large abstract paintings that would overwhelm the viewer and evoke basic human conditions, which Rothko described as tragedy, ecstasy, and doom. Such claims for abstract painting have been discredited in recent years as non-objective forms have acquired their own history of references and associations. This particular work, though, I can, again, those of you who know me know I'm a specialist in Mark Rothko, and this painting was always known to be a breakout painting for him. He painted in New Orleans, and while he was a visiting artist, and he even wrote to an artist he was friends with in New Orleans afterwards, saying that he had a major breakthrough. But nobody knew exactly what triggered this breakthrough. Now, one of the key elements in this work that's different from the previous Rothkos is that the color combination of blue-green. I was recently in New Orleans to give a lecture, actually on Rothko in New Orleans, and I was driving around the French Quarter and right away was struck by the fact that one of the historical colors, two of the colors sanctioned by the Historical Landmark Commission was these blue and greens, and they were readily available at the hardware store where Rothko, we know, actually bought his paints while he was in New Orleans. That mystery was solved. But there was another thing that changed in this painting. Prior to this work, the rectangular forms that you see here would typically go out almost to the edge of the canvas, leaving, maybe that much of the underground stain all around the more central form. Here, instead, we see there's a big border, that lighter blue border all around the blue, green, white monolithic form in the center. And, I gave my lecture and had said about the blue and green, but I said I really don't know what triggered the change in the form here. Driving to the airport the next morning, past one of the cemeteries in New Orleans, which is known for their above-the-ground cemeteries, and there it was. I realized that what triggered this change in form were these distinctive tombs. And if you look at the Rothko, you can see it has a very architectural feel to it. It has a sense of almost an impending doom. And I really do feel that he was referencing this kind of architectural tomb. In the 40s, in his surrealist paintings, he actually did do a number of works entitled Entombment. It's not such a wild guess on my part. And right after he paints this painting, he starts work on his murals for the Seagram building, for the Four Seasons restaurant. And one of the things he says about his aim was to create a space that was completely claustrophobic, that you felt basically entombed and entrapped in. So here's an example of an artist using abstraction, using things that we might not have right away thought of a mausoleum, of a tomb, of a vault, but it's something that is familiar with us without having to make that immediate association. And that, to me, is how someone like Rothko does get these feelings of dread, using the more universal language of abstraction. Now, since the late 1980s, the figure has reemerged as a primary conductor of human emotion in art, and let's look at a little bit of a history that has to do with that. And part of the reason why the figure has returned as this conveyor of emotion in art is due to the current interest in feminist studies and phenomenological psychology. The existential philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty, in his essay *The Film and the New Psychology*, observes that anger, shame, hate, and love are not psychic. Are not psychic facts hidden at the bottom of another's consciousness. They are types of behavior or styles of conduct which are visible from the outside. They exist on this face or those gestures, not hidden behind them. And this